Hello, welcome to another episode of Deck Musings. So this is where we're up to this period in Standard here. We've just had Stronghold come into Standard. And I'm going to be talking about this deck, TurboZvi, bracket Dream Halls. So, and yeah, created by this guy. And he was famous for this particular deck amongst many decks and something called My Fires. I'll include a link so you can read a little bit more in here. I'm trying to remember the name of the book that he wrote as well. It was an e-book I saw kicking around several years ago, which he'd written about like early days of Magic. So I'm going to get on to the actual deck in a moment. I'll also include a link here. So this is a description of the deck. That its creation coincided with Stronghold, and we'll see the key cards behind it. I've actually attempted to shoot this video once already, but I noticed too many anomalies. The deck's actually covered in the Deck Deconstruction Companion by Beth Morrison, which I've mentioned before, and it came out in 1999, but it's like a retrospective book, so it looks back over tournament decks and various decks that were featured in Magic the Gathering magazines from like way back in the original days of Magic, and it does feature the TurboZvi deck in it. But there's actually a typo, or there's a couple of anomalies which we'll talk about in a moment. But there's a typo in the description of how it's played. So I'm actually going to go by this description. Yeah, they get muddled up and start talking about ancestral recall when they mean ancestral memories. So anyway, so I'll move this to one side because I need to read it off while going through the deck. So here's the deck. So there are 4 Lotus Petals in the deck, and you can see Lotus Petal, 0 to cast. Tap, sacrifice Lotus Petal, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. You'll also notice that the deck features at least 1 card from all of the sets that are currently in Standard. That's not a requirement, but that's just an observation. You'll see there's some core set stuff in here as well, which is interesting. So this is the key card, and it basically helps it. So I imagine it's not the sort of deck I'd want to try and play. It would just mess with my head too much. It's a very slow deck, and I think it mentions, a bit I will read is, yeah, it says TurboZvi can spend an hour or more on a single turn reshuffling and cycling through the deck. It's one of those decks you get into this loop. So it's one of those very loopy combo deck with multiple different pieces, but it's not like some deck where you got like a 2-card combo and boom, you're done. There's a sort of synergistic combinations which work together, and once you get yourself in a position to do that, it takes quite a while to kill your opponent because you're killing them through decking them. So we'll start off with Dream Halls. You can see 3 and 2 blue. Instead of paying the casting cost for a spell of any colour, its caster may choose and discard a card that shares at least 1 colour with the spell. If the spell is X in its casting cost, X is 0. And so the idea is you resolve the dream halls and then pitch blue cards from your hand to cast card drawing spells. You draw through most, if not all, of your deck, and you assemble something, some sort of kill. Now, like more potent methods of, killing your opponent came about later in Standards history, or just in any environment that could legally play a dream halls. But in 1998 Type 2, which is what we're talking about, it was very clunky, but it was effective, but just clunky. So once the dream halls was resolved, the idea was to pitch blue cards, as I've said, to cast card drawing spells. You find Mana Severance, which we'll look at in a moment. Actually, let's scroll down to Mana Severance. Where are we? There you go. It's a sorcery, 1 and a blue. Search your library for any number of land cards, then remove them from the game. Shuffle your library afterwards. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, the idea is, if you've done that, you've got all of the remaining lands out of the deck, and anything you draw won't be a land, it'll be a spell. So first thing, before you even need to think about resolving dream halls, is make sure your mana base is in a position where you can play everything you need to. You'll notice that a lot of the spells are quite high mana costs. Also, there are some mana producers here that produce like a bump in mana as well, so which we'll look at in a moment. Yeah, so you get using Mana Severance to get the lands out of the deck, and then leveraging Gaea's Blessing, which is 1 and a green. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from his or her graveyard into his or her library. Draw a card. If Gaea's Blessing is put into your graveyard from your plate, shuffle your graveyard into your library. So it is restocking your library. So with all this going on, and you'll notice there's a lot of card draw in the deck as well. So you've got access to counter magic, access to card draw, and you've got access to a lobotomy. So, well, there's only one lobotomy. Well, the point is, through these like cards that cause you to be able to restock your library from your graveyard, you're also restocking lobotomies back into your library. So 2 blue black, look at the target player's hand and choose any of those cards other than a basic land. Search that player's graveyard, hand and library for all copies of the chosen card and remove them from the game. That player shuffles his or her library afterwards. So you're looping through, using the various combination of cards in the deck. You're getting card draw, you're getting counter spells, and eventually, firstly you're going to lobotomize away the opponent's hand. Then through the use of, where's it gone? Inspiration. You can feed your opponent 2 cards and then lobotomize those 2 cards and so on. If the opponent's managed to cast a spell, you can counter it because you're loaded up with counterspells. Because the idea is this all goes off on a single turn. You want this to all just happen on a single turn. But imagine it's extremely laborious. And you're just getting into these sort of draw loops. And looping around so you get access to counter magic and so on. Locking your opponent down for the turn, drawing 2 cards at a time, removing with lobotomy, rinse, repeat. Yeah. And eventually with this inspiration, and any other mechanism by which they are burning through cards, because that's going to happen anyway if they're drawing as well as the draw and you're casting the stuff they've drawn regularly. They'll deck themselves. So your turn will end, they'll attempt to draw a card, and if you draw an empty deck, you lose the game. So yeah. So with that in your head, you'll see that we've got mana generators to help us to get into a position of being able to cast some of these higher casting cost spells. In addition here, the dream halls, although of course, because once you have this in, so you want this in play because it affects other cards. It has, you can see here, instead of paying the casting cost for any spell of colour, its caster may choose and discard a card that shares at least one colour with that spell. So once this is out, that then has an effect on anybody gets. And notice that instead of paying the casting cost for any card, its caster may choose and discard a card. Yeah, so like a global enchantment. I think that's what they were called back in the day, weren't they? Global enchantments. Oh, come on, I'm going to dig around with this in a moment. So you've got these counterspells, various counterspells. There's counterspell itself, 2 blue, counter target spell. You've got impulse, which is looking at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the rest of your bottom of your library, shuffle your library afterwards. So top of the library manipulation. You've got Memory Lapse, where it bounces the counter spell back. Intuition, searching your library for 3 cards, revealing them to the opponent. They get to choose one, and you put that card in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. Meditate, which at the right point, is going to put 4 cards in your hand. Admittedly, you skip the next turn, but maybe you never get to that next turn because you can get into the loop with all the cards. Inspiration, as we were talking about earlier. Display. Target player draws 2 cards. There's our land base. And again, things that are likely to create a sudden mana spurt, I suppose. So Ancient Tombs, there's 4 of those. Crystal Vein, Island, Svyelunite Temple from 5th edition, which was a reprint from Fallen Empires. Sorceries, the Gaea's Blessing, Mana Severance, search low for any number of land cards and remove them from the game. The Lobotomy, you've got Sift, draw 3 cards, then choose and discard a card. So looting. Ancestral Memories, 2 and 3 blue. You look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Now notice with Lobotomy, as I think I said, you're removing the cards from the game. We've got Sideboard here as well. Adarkar Wastes, which is in here because there is an Abeyance in the Sideboard. We've got Hydroblast. You can see there's a number of counter spells, but also we've got some additional cards. So there's an additional Inspiration, an additional Lobotomy, an Abeyance, which is 1 and a blue. Till end of turn, target player cannot play instants, interrupt, sorceries or abilities requiring an activation cost. Draw a card. So it's in the sideboard, but you can see why this would work in the deck against certain matchups. Now also, and this was because the listing in the deck deconstruction book had an additional 4 Mox Diamonds. If in the link I'm linking to, they're not in that deck. Everything else is the same. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a misprint, as far as I know. I think it might just be there was a certain iteration of the deck which had 64 cards in it, and 4 Mox Diamonds. So Mox Diamond, 0 to cast. When it comes into play, choose and discard a land or sacrifice Mox Diamond. Tap, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. Yeah. So let's go through as usual and see what rabbit holes we go down. I'm going to focus more on the cards obviously we haven't seen before, because we're getting to a point now where I am in a danger of repeating myself quite a bit between episodes. So, oh yeah, most important bit, the land. Nice artwork. From Tempest. Ancestral Memories is in Mirage, Portal, 6th and 7th. So top 7, 2 of them in your hand, the rest go into the graveyard. But because of the nature of the deck, that's not such a big deal, because you've got mechanisms by which stuff comes back from your graveyard into the library. And it mentions Impulse here, which is actually in the deck. So it's tagged with Impulse, tagged with Mulch. Similar to Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time's got Delve on it because the cost on it's quite high. It's 6 and 2 blue. But same effect there, I think. Although it is instant speed, saying that. Drawn from Dreams, similar to 2 and 2 blue. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So these go back into your library on this card. On this card it's into your graveyard. On Dig Through Time it's your library. So an impulse effect is where you look at the top N cards and put +1 of them, 1+ of them into your hand. Not to be confused with Red's pseudo card draw effect, impulsive draw. Yep. 151 such cards. Well, I'm more interested in Mulch here. So an effect that filters cards at the top of your library, putting the remainders into your graveyard. So this is specific to this effect. And you'll see that if we do this and then go through the colours, so here let's start off with white. Not so many, and a lot of them are multicoloured. And you can see some of them do it in a bit of a convoluted way. Well, there's an additional caveat to it. Once you get into blue, 36 cards which have that mulch type thing going on. Again, a few of these in combination with other colours. And we get into black, 24 of those, and you'll notice with several of the black ones there's an additional cost. So, you know, it does damage to you, or you know, depletes your life, which is fairly common for you know, anything in black like that, where you've got some sort of card draw. Almost often you see like a blue type spell when it's in black. There might be an additional cost in terms of some other resource, like life loss seems to be the classic one. Red. We'll come back to card drawing and red in a moment because it will come up in the context of a different card. And in green, so there's quite a few, and the term mulch comes from this card. So reveal the top 4 cards of your library to all players. Put any of those cards that are lands into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. And you'll see there's a number of these that are quite specific about what they, in terms of the type of card that you're revealing. Sometimes it's lands, sometimes it's creatures. You might find you get things like enchantments as well. But yeah, quite a number there. Ancient Tomb, yeah, great for like a mana ramp. It's a pain land. It's also a soul land because of this 2 colourless mana. So there's a number of lands that produce 2 colourless mana, which Soul Ring also produces. Similar to City of Traitors, you'll notice here when you play another land, sacrifice City of Traitors, add 2 to your mana pool. So that's its downside. Temple of False Gods, you can't actually activate the ability, the mana generation ability on it until you control 5 or more lands. As I said, there is a site, there are pain lands throughout Magic's history. Where the cost is the damage that it does to you. And then doing it at the point which you tap for mana. You also get other things like shock lands and lands that when they come into play, at that point they do the damage. So what falls into the category of soul lands? So you've got things, as we've said, City of Traitors. Crystal Vein is actually in the deck as well. So with this one, the variant is that it, instead of dealing 2 damage to you, if you want to tap into this extra 2 mana, you basically have to sacrifice it. The other ones that generate 2 mana, you can see, are often card type specific. That's the condition on those. Counterspell we've looked at numerous times before, and the thing with counterspells, of course, is you get these variants between, based on the original one. So 2 blue, counter target spell. You'll often see, changes in the mana cost versus certain conditions. So you might see an increase in the mana cost for a counter spell because maybe this is seen as too powerful. You might see being colour shifted or with an additional caveat. There might be some downsides, something else you have to do, an additional cost on it. And then you might see, all variations in between of those 2 things. So either something going on up here or something going on down here. Yeah, there's our Crystal Vein. Again, if we look at the tags, Soul Land, Ramp, adds multiple mana. And yeah, there's other cards which add much more mana than that, but again, when you get to that into that category, so they're not super broken. You yeah, there's some sort of downside or condition. Dream Halls was reprinted online as part of Tempest Remastered, just in Stronghold. So this is one of the cards that was specifically added, you know, or came into standard as a result of Stronghold being released. So how is this placed? Well, in terms of tagging, discard outlet, free cast another, synergy, colour share, and that's a storyline card. So let's look at free cast another, because this is quite interesting, I think, anyway. So you get a lot of interesting stuff coming up in terms of what it might lead you to cast. So I'm more interested in you get a number of these which are free casting something else. I think what I'm more interested in is initially enchantments to do it. So they're sort of sitting on the battlefield and you're able to leverage that ability. So there's 29 enchantments that fall into that category. And some of them, yeah, have a ridiculous cost or a higher cost attached to them. Other ones, they're quite specific, or they've got some other downside. So they could be just conditionally selective. So the opportunity to play them, or the way you'd have to play is a downside in and of itself, or they might have a very specific downside to them. And I suppose you would hope that on a permanent where, yeah, it can, yeah, these sort of permanents you can see act as a facilitator. So yes, you are pitching a spell, but in the context of the deck, where you can get stuff back from the graveyard, and in terms of, you know, going over that initial barrier to it going off, yeah, they do exactly what they're supposed to. So it's interesting when you see these cards, you know, in standard, and a lot of them, people look at them and go, well, that's not very good. And then somebody goes, aha, if I do the following, yeah, true, it's going to take me an hour to play a turn, but yeah, not really my style of deck, but yeah. It's you know, again, interesting stuff to look at, I think, because it does make you think about certain styles of play, even if they're not the style that you would play. What's that saying? You know, if you need a Peter Fox, think of its tricks. So, you know, you obviously need to have knowledge of how these decks work, so you might, you know, come up with ways of counteracting that. Just curious where it's sort of stapled to an artifact, of course. And again, with these alternate cost cards that can be abused or can set up certain situations, a lot of them are nerfed. Gaia's Blessing. So target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from his or her graveyard into his or her library. Draw a card. If it's put into your graveyard from a library, shuffle your graveyard into your library. So this is, you know, obviously a critical card in here from Weatherlight. Restock Shelf is Restock Shelf. Restock Self is one of the cards. Interesting to see that restocking, is not exclusive to that colour, to green. So it's spread out quite a bit. And again, the other reason I find sort of restocking cards fascinating is you'll notice there's a number of creatures which do this thing where they shuffle back into the library. And of course in the right deck that can be seriously abused, and also prevent you from decking yourself in certain decks, because there's a lot of decks that these feature in where the primary engine is to like burn through your library and provide you with as much card advantage as possible, and but also can can come back from the graveyard. Yeah, a lot of annoying loopy decks that do that. But the creatures that fall into that category tend to have a very, very high or tricky casting cost. Undying Beast, that's an interesting looking card. Only in Portal. Put into your discard pile. Yeah. Old Spied Worm, yes. And then these elemental incarnations came back. Yeah, a lot of these are interesting to play around with in Commander, providing the utility is conducive to singleton play. Impulse we've looked at before, and there is a type of card called Impulse, which is, as we saw, look at the top end cards and put one plus into them into your hand. And better than Anticipate. Looks at the top threes, puts one into your hand and the rest on the bottom of the library in any order. And better than Shimmer of Possibilities. Again, this one's 4 cards. On the bottom of your library in a random order. It doesn't say shuffle like this one does, but this is an instant and this is a sorcery. Inspiration. Target player draws 2 cards. So it's interesting to look and compare it against things like Ancestral Recall. So it's 3 in a blue to draw 2 cards, but of course you can and in this deck the point is you're targeting your opponent. With Ancestral Recall you can also target an opponent if you really wanted to. It's a single blue. You get 3 cards. Inspiration is similar to Deep Analysis. It's got flashback on it. Similar to Weave Fate. 3 in the blue. Draw 2 cards. But you can't target an opponent. It's also better than Touch of Brilliance. Another just draw 2 cards. Worse than Hieroglyph in Illumination. 3 in the blue, draw 2 cards with cycling. So cycling makes it better because you've got that additional utility. And worse than Comparative Analysis. Because again, additional utility. So that's got Surge on it. From that brief period where they were trying to promote, was it Two-Headed Giant, I think? Yeah, I mean, tons of cards with draw on it, so it drawed stuff, but like I said, it interesting because you can target your opponent. Intuition. So search for 3 cards, reveal them. Your opponent chooses one of them, put the card into your hand, and the rest in your graveyard. So, yeah, in this deck, hey, they're going into your graveyard, which you can loop through. But of course, yeah, similar to fact or fiction. So fact or fiction, pile dilemma based card advantage. There's 20 of those in Magic, or 20 of those that are tagged up as such. Acts as a tutor, tutors to hand. Opponent chooses, of course. But also what's happening is by them choosing, so interesting point is that it's also allowing you to tutor cards into your graveyard, which, because of the mechanism of the deck, you know, works to your advantage. So yeah, really interesting choice of card in this deck. Oh, Lobotomy, here we go. So target player reveals their hand, then you choose a card other than the basic land card from it, search that player's graveyard or hand and library full cards with the same name as the chosen card, and exile them, then that player shuffles. So you think, well, this is a pretty critical card, why is there a one-off? Well, again, the mechanism of this looping recursion, the graveyard mulching, whatever you want to call it, the looting that's going on, the weird tutoring effect you're getting there because you're getting these mulch type effects, means that, yeah, unless this card were to get exiled for some reason, then yeah, you're going to have access to it somehow. So yeah, there's one copy of that. Similar to Dispossess, which is a black card. Notice a lot of these do target specific things beyond just, you know, a named card. So they're very specific about the type of card that they target. As is this, yeah, it's other than a basic land. And it has its own. So cards which exile all cards of a particular name from a player's hand, library and or graveyard. It's interesting that Lobotomy was actually reprinted so relatively quickly between sets. But you can also see here, yeah, there's a number of Lobotomy type effects, but they have all these different conditions attached to them as well. They don't always work in exactly the same way as Lobotomy. But they're that, you know, looking at the player's hand and then now here again, and I tend to forget this, it's exiling the cards, which is, you know, is really critical because that's going to prevent an opponent, yeah, from leveraging cards. Maybe they're playing a similar deck, which, you know, cards can be leveraged from the graveyard. This deals with that because it just exiles the cards. So yeah. Mana Severance. So this is the card where, you know, it just strips your library of land cards and exiles them. So when you play this, you've got to make sure that you do have enough mana to pull off what you need to pull off. Similar to Endless Horizons. extract tag, so exile cards from a library, and they're just gone. And there's 31 cards that do that in again various ways of doing that. You can see the enchantments here, sorceries. It's attached to a creature, attached to an artifact. The other good point about extract cards generally, so here we're just using it to force the hand of chance, but other variations of extraction, as you saw there, often, oops, let's go back in, act as ways of dealing with combos, or can. So it's an interesting tool to play around with, because it can be used in a way to, like I say, create a situation which probability wise is to your advantage, but also it could be used, and I wouldn't include this particular card in this category, because this is specifically stripping lands out, and it's searching your library, but you'll notice there's a number of extraction type cards which will target a player and strip their stuff. So yeah, great way of dealing with certain types of combo decks. Another interesting card, in as much as, you know, this is the sort of card where you want to get in a position to cast this, and it's going to tip the balance, because if you can imagine it, all of this looping, this mulching, you know, the mechanics behind the deck go off in a single turn. So if you're playing this to get card advantage, and it's going to be the turn that you go off on, you get into that mulchy loop, or whatever we want to call it, then you don't care if you're going to skip your next turn. And of course the other thing is, with this, if you're like drawing multiples of these on that same turn as part of, you know, going through your library and getting stuff back from your graveyard, yeah, you can see how this can get seriously out of control. So I wonder if we were to do, so yeah, let's look at this. So there's 13 cards that make you skip the turn, and generally it's because, you know, they have quite a major effect. So you get something big now, but then the downside is, you know, you skip your turn. Now some of these might be worded slightly differently, of course, in that it might be like a punishment. But I think here, you know, to an opponent, but I think here it's all you skipping your turn. I don't think it's forcing your opponent to skip their turn for the cards that are in here. Skip turn. So let me just go back to the card. There was something else here I wanted to add. Yeah, I think. Oh, that was it, yeah. So I was curious about obviously drawing cards, but how many I'll start off with that. It'd probably be better if I split this down, but we'll see. If I do that, draw 4 cards. So there's 21 cards that somewhere along the line draw 4 cards. This is really interesting because we should get to it in a moment, I think. Looting versus is it rummaging, I think. So with blue cards, normally you get to draw the cards first and then you discard them. That's around the other way. You discard 2 non-land cards with the same name, draw 4 cards. So I suppose what's happening here is you could view that actually as payment for doing that, thinking about it. So that's why, yeah. It's your payment. Upfront cost. Yeah, it's your upfront cost. Memory Lapse, counter target spell. Yeah, there's another counter spell, but it bounces back to the top of the library. Again, you know, you're getting rid of anything that might be interfering with that hour-long turn. Yeah, so it's a tuck counter spell, but it's tucking it to the top of the library as opposed to somewhere in it. And if you look up tuck spells, it's any spell that puts it in your owner's library. Interesting here, we got this one in white actually. So the only colour we don't appear to be able to, well, we got, yeah, are we missing, yeah, there's no black. Tuck effect. Sift, draw 3 cards and choose and discard a card. Okay, so yeah, this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit. So again, common cards that we've seen before coming up, because there's, you realise by now there's a lot of card draw in this deck, which you can access given the appropriate amount of mana or the certain mana conditions. And so we see the usual things come up here. But what's interesting is when you look at specifically at looting, so drawing a card, then discarding a card, mainly in blue. The reverse of that is rummaging, where you discard a card and then draw. You can see looting comes up quite a lot in Magic, and if I was to go through the different colours here, and by just looking at the timeline you can see quite a lot of it. Interestingly, red did it. The same way round as blue cards, looting, before it went on to rummaging. And I suspect if we were to go through the colours, what you might find is for some of the colours it's because they combine with another. And I'm just trying to find one where maybe... Oh, connive, there you go. So it might be a result of some set ability that just happens to have been extended out to that colour, or a condition or a side effect of something else. So blue, yeah, a lot, and also in combination with other things. Black, combination with other colours. Do we get any mono black ones? That's connive again. Yeah. Presence of another colour or conniving seems to impart it to black. I was wondering if it was a result of a alternative cost. or something that works on a resource. Red, 35 of them. But again, beyond really early red cards that did it, it's there because of the presence of blue as well. And then green, are we going to see anything in green? Well, greater good, but all the others again in combination with something else. It's because it's a flip. There's our reprint from Fallen Empires, which happens to be in 5th edition, which is the current core set at this time that was in standard. So a nice sort of bit of mana wrap. And we came across this when we looked at Fallen Empires. It's part of that cycle. Also similar to other cycles. So you've got Ancient Spring, Sprazan Sperry, so again, have some way of creating additional mana beyond just one, but this one you sack it. And there's the cycle in all their glory. Abeyance, so as I said in the sideboard, there is a dual land in there which allows us access to white mana because of the presence of Abeyance. And you can see with this, until end of turn, target player cannot play instants, interrupts, sorceries or abilities requiring an activation cost. So I'll be interested to see how they tag this. Are they going to, silence effect, so we'll have a look at that. Cantrip because it draws a card. Additionally, hate instance, oversized, must have been an oversized card at some point. Hate activation, hate sorcery, prevent activation. So silence type effect. There's 14 of those. And of course we'll be able to look at silence. There you go. M10. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. Whereas this is, they cannot play instants, interrupts or sorceries or abilities requiring an activation cost. So it's very specific about what sort of spell, but also targets activation costs. So useful sideboard card in this deck where, in addition to trying to get everything done on a turn to deck your opponent, you just want to make sure there's nothing's going to interfere with that. You have access to as much counterspell stuff as possible. And here is the Adarkar Wastes to get access to that white mana. So you'd sideboard those in as well. They're from 5th edition. Because Ice Age would have rotated out a few months earlier. Dismiss, another counterspell. So 2 and 2 blue, but you get to draw a card off of it as well. It's a cantrip because of that. Counterspell. So at this point you had interrupts. And it's better than a Bone to Ash. Because that's 2 and 2 blue. Counter target creature spell. So this is more specific. It's better than a failed inspection. Counter target spell. Draw a card, then discard a card. So it's got looting on it, as opposed to just a straight card draw. And also better than a contradict. So because that's higher mana. So again, I think I mentioned this earlier, it's interesting when we do this because you can sort of see how things get better or worse based on either mana cost shenanigans or rule text shenanigans or any combinations thereof. And also, of course, I forget to mention it, the type of spell as well. whether it's an instant or a sorcery or something else. Yeah. Hydroblast, 5th edition, originally printed in Ice Age, so that's in the sideboard. Obviously, you're going to bring that in if you happen to be going up against some sort of red deck, which, based on the cards we've seen and the episodes we've done, you'll know that red was a thing. Like red deck wins type of decks, slide decks, those fast red decks. So, you know, likely to get your life down to 0 before you even have a chance to assemble your cards. And this card, Mox Diamond, like I said, it's confusing because based on the list that I'm going to post from this forum, doesn't feature in that deck. I've seen other deck listings where it doesn't feature. It was around standard at that time. It had just come in through Stronghold as the key card, but it is listed in the deck deconstruction deck list, and it brings the deck up to 64 cards. Let me just double check that again, because the reason why I say that is it can get confusing, because I wonder if there are variants of the deck where see, it helps. This card helps with things like, I mean, it helps with the Abeyance, but it's 0 to cast. The downside is you have to discard a land card to do that. So yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the deck to know what is the advantage here. I'm just looking through. I'm just going to try to find the list in the, and yeah, the Abeyance is there. So in the sideboard, and I've been through multiple times on this and totaled it all up. But yeah, the copy of the deck in the deconstruction companion book is definitely 64 cards in the main deck. So I thought I'd mention this because it was in there, but not in this other listing, because we shall see what it is tagged as similar to. So it is a Moxen. So let's see how it compares to other Moxen. So once the original ones were printed, you can sort of get a feel for how can we dial back that. Because that's just ridiculous. You have a 0 cost artifact and it taps for mana. Interrupt speed. So we've got there's a release date. What have I done there? It's actually, there it is. Can't see for looking. So yeah, I suppose there's the first attempt after the original ones to dial it back a bit, and how they did that was it replaces a land in your hand. So the downside is that if the land's your only mana source, then on that particular turn, so you wouldn't be able to do your land drop, but you would be able to do a Mox drop. And you can see the price here, and then other ways. So this one's an imprint card. Mox Opal is only activated if you had 3 or more artifacts, so Metalcraft. We'll skip over the silly cards, shall we? Mox Amber. Add 1 mana of any colour among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. And Mox 10 to light. It's a suspend card. Modern Horizons. And there we have it. So yeah, pretty limited amount of Moxes, and you can see why. Obviously, you know, the way round it, and then it's not strictly well, then it's no longer a Mox anymore, is to, you know, have a casting cost. And you probably recognise there's quite a few mana generators in Magic that, you know, cost 1 to cast artifacts, and they tap for a particular type of mana, multiple mana, or then you've got things like mana dorks as well. So yeah, dial it back that way. So there we have it. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, and you got to understand the nature of the deck. As I said, I will make sure that I reintroduce this back into my links, so you'll read through and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense about how it's played. Yeah. And there's also a little bit about how it's been modified over time, which is also interesting. And you can see here it says, in 1999, in the wake of the Dreamhalls into Mind Over Matter combo deck. So, you know, it must have been a point at which it became much more of a serious combo and wasn't so drawn out. The Magic Invitational, it was banned in Type 2, banned in Extended, and restricted in Type 1, but the story doesn't end there. So why not, let's have added bonus. Let's have a quick look at Mind Over Matter, because I'm not... Choose and discard a card. Tap or untap target artifact, creature or land. Yeah, obviously this must combo up with something else. It's another enchantment. Oh. Yeah, okay. I'm making a guess here, but of course with that in play, oh, you can cheat that out. Okay. I see, right. But I'm sure there's more to it than that. Okay, thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I'll catch you in a future episode.